Magandang umaga, magandang tanghali, magandang hapon at magandang gabi. We'd like to welcome you for your hour. Ito po si Rita Gadi. Sa mga nakaraang linggo na tayo ay naglalabas ng ating mga panukala at ang ating mga obserbasyon sa mga nangyayari hindi lang dito sa ating bayan, ngunit sa buong mundo. Lahat ito ay nakatali halos sa COVID-19, yung pandemya na yan. We have seen how in many countries we've had these graphs actually that we can read, and you could see how it was in Europe. After 5-6 months, they were already almost, free of the COVID-19. Kung makikita nga yung graph nila ay kukonti na lang ang nagkakaroon ng virus na yan. And then suddenly, after 7 months or 8 months, biglang tumaas ang dami at nakakataranta. Hindi lang sa kanila, ngunit sa atin din. Sapagkat ngayon, because of many studies and observations and because of the experience that we are going through here in our country, the economic managers, the finance ministers, our president himself has already made several announcements regarding easing the quarantines that we are actually in. Yung tinatawag ng mga lockdown, mga quarantine, lahat ng yan. So that you can eat at restaurants. Dati-rati kasi take out lang, ngayon you could already eat, but there would always be the observance of what they call the health protocols. And the same goes with transportation. There was a time when jeepneys were not allowed, ngayon pwede na. They have specific routes. And then buses, for instance, and many others, many other establishments and businesses have also been open. But we are still in this stage na talagang nag-aabang tayo na wag sana mangyari yung biglang dadami na naman ang mga nagkakasakit. If it is any consolation, there are lesser and lesser deaths, so to speak, if you look at the percentage. And then, of course, there is a good percentage of those who are recovering. There is also the possibility that a vaccine will already be available sometime by summer of next year or maybe even sooner. And the countries that are developing the vaccine, like the United States of America, the People's Republic of China, Russia, have all registered their concern for the rest of the world and especially for the Philippines. And they have already declared that we could enter into a joint arrangement with them as far as the testing of the vaccine and the coordination that we could have. And of course, can we afford it once it is already out in the market? The President, time and time again, has always said, maghintay kayo, darating na yung vaccine na yan. But by and large, we have done just about everything we could as far as observing health protocols are concerned. And the President, likewise, together with his executive department, have also been rather busy insofar as managing how we can be able to have enough of the testing, enough of the contact tracing, as they say, and of course the treatment and hopefully the recovery. What is perhaps encouraging is the fact that there has been a lower percentage as far as the contamination is concerned, especially for the National Capital Region. But still, we have to be very aware of all the health protocols which we have to follow. Kagaya ng mga kasing edad ko na, talagang hindi daw pwede lumabas ng bahay. Of course, there are certain age brackets also. But now we go into the educational system, and that is where we don't have the face-to-face. Walang mga classrooms na pinapasukan ng mga bata. They're using either their tablets. It's sad that those who do not have this, especially in some areas, they use their mobile phones. But we're hoping that all of these institutions, classrooms, and schools, especially in the public schools, there will be people who will be donating yung mga tablet nga na kailangan. Ang hirap kasi dun sa mobile phone sinusundan yung yung kanilang araw-araw na distance learning, so to speak. But this all boils down to the funding for many of these programs that even the President would want already executed, pero kulang talaga kasi ang dami-daming, kagaya ngayon pinag-uusapan yung budget sa Kongreso, ang dami-daming mga departmentong nangangailangan. For instance, the Department of Agriculture, which has early on announced that food really is the most important element now, because food on the table will at least be able to help out with the nutrition that is needed by everybody. But kung wala nang hanap buhay, ang hirap naman kung walang pera, pabili ng pagkain, kasi uunahin ang mas mahalaga, yung gamot and whatever it is that you consider as the basic needs. So we go down to where exactly we can be able to source our funds. And sometimes, not sometimes, but quite often you would hear me and see me talking about going back to the past at a period which there seemed to be some direction and some kind of not a kind of, but actually a direction as far as government policies are concerned. And I go back to this because sabi ko nga, marami tayong matututunan, marami sanang naisagawa kung talagang pinagpatuloy. At kahit na pinag-uusapan natin ngayon itong pandemya na ito, marami pa rin tayong mga makikitang aral sa nakaraan, at ito ang kinakailangan na magamit ngayon sapagkat nagawa na ito eh. We have so many of these stories and these narratives which tell us that it can be done, whatever impossibilities and disasters and difficulties and problems our country may have. There have already been programs that were instituted at some time in the past. And this is where I keep on speaking and talking about the 20 years of President Ferdinand E. Marcos, together with his lady, our First Lady, Imelda Romualdez Marcos, with many of their programs and projects that have been able to bring about what, for instance, is most important now, food sufficiency, and then of course many other things. So pag-usapan natin yan. There was actually a bill already passed, and that bill has already been executed, and this is the Bayanihan. Ito yung tinatawag ang Heal as One, or let us help each other, let us be united to help those who are most in need. The Bayanihan one was early on part of that package of assistance to be given to those who are most in need. Nagkaroon nga ng mga listahan kung saan manggagaling yung tinatawag na nangangailangan. And that is why they had to go to the Department of Social Welfare, and then of course to the barangays. That fund which was there for the first Bayanihan 1 law has already been distributed. Merong mga auditing na ginagawa ngayon, ngunit all over the country, for the 81 provinces, 1,500 cities and municipalities, the 44,000 barangays, lahat yan ay nabigyan na doon sa unang-unang batas na tinawag ang Bayanihan Act. Tulong-tulong. So, we have another Bayanihan Act 2. Ito naman ay para tumulong sa mga, yung madalas kong sabihin, mga micro-industries, mga maliliit na mga negosyo. And every time I mention, for instance, the vendors in the streets, not those in the marketplace, because they have sufficient, they can be able to have sufficient income when it comes to the marketing of their products. Pero ito yung mga informal economy. And we have so many of them. As a matter of fact, 65% nga ng ating economy is actually there in this informal sector, na yung mga talipapa and all of this. And that Bayanihan Act 2, that bill is actually designed to help them, other than augmenting also what the Department of Health would be needing, the Department of Agriculture, Social Welfare, and all of those other executive offices that will be assisting not just the baseline of those most in need, but also little businesses, yung mga micro stores, yung mga micro economic ventures, kagaya ng mga sari-sari stores, yung mga karinderiya at lahat ng yan. Now, where do we get the funding? Of course, our taxes are there, but not at this particular stage. Medyo hirap nga na ma-comply yung kinakailangan na magbayad ng taxes. Those who are employed, that is immediately taken up by their employers, na nababawasan yung sweldo, merong percentage, 20 to 30% go to taxes. So, ano na yon, naayos na yon. Pero for all the rest of the country, those who are working or those who are employed right now, yung taxes, yan ang pinanggagalingan ng pondo. na pinag-uusapan ngayon sa Kongreso. They're actually discussing what is known as the General Appropriations Act. That is the national budget. Now, this is going to be partitioned or already has been set for all the different departments that are in need. If those of you who are here in the country and then you tune in or watch the actual and the live deliberations they have in Congress, you could listen to the congressmen that are defending the budgets of these executive offices, because it is a discussion in plenary, meaning andun na sa floor lahat ng mga representatives natin ay nagsasalita at sila ang yung mga departments are the ones relying on them to defend their budget. Kung pakikinggan ninyo ay nakakalungkot sapagkat marami ay hindi nakakabigkas ng kinakailangan sabihin tungkol sa defense ng isang budget. Halimbawa, kagaya sa agriculture, kung sino man yung congressman na nagdi-defend ng mga pangangailangan sa agriculture, paikot-ikot yung kanyang sagot. Madidinig ninyo ito. And that is the quality of the leaders that we elect into office. And you could test test whatever is between their ears, so to speak. Kung anong meron, kung may utak ba sila, at bakit sila andyan, legislating, ngunit namamalipit sila sa mga mga sagot at mga katanungan. And it's really very sad. It reflects on the kind of people that we elect into office. By 2022, which is about 500 days from now, or just a little over 500 days, we will be electing again another set of officials, from the president, vice president, senators, congressmen, and all the other local officials which are in office right now. We don't know, or most of them will be running for re-election. There will be new faces and new characters coming in. But right now we're talking about Congress. The budget is actually submitted by the President to Congress. Sila ang magsisiyasat nito. They will look over what the Office of the President has submitted. And the Office of the President has gathered all the needs of the different departments. Defense, education, social welfare, lahat ng yan. Pagdating sa Kongreso, may mga committee to which they are assigned. Sa Kongreso, meron din silang Committee on Finance, committee ng ganito. Pagkatapos niyan, magbibigay sila ng report, and then that is what we are witnessing today, and until perhaps by the end of this month. The budget is being discussed now on the floor, so that whatever amendments or revisions or whatever else they would want to do with it will already be set there, and then they will go into the voting for it until its final reading, and then they submit it to the Senate. Isang iikot na naman yan na pag-uusapan ng Senate, although I think right now they're already considering this. But I'm actually going back in time to be able to, for us to understand that the sourcing of the funding for many of the programs that are needed by government should have been taken from, okay, I will start from there. When the Mrs. Aquino administration took over, one of the first executive orders that she signed was the Executive Order Number 1, which actually dictated the office of the PCGG to sequester, to sell, to get whatever properties they allegedly felt belonged to Marcos, his family, his associates, his friends, etc. Mahaba yon. In other words, they sequestered, they got the money, etc. Binabalikan ko ito sapagkat kailangan tanungin, anong nangyari sa lahat ng nakuha ng pamahalaan ni Mrs. Aquino na sinasabi nilang pag-aari ng mga Marcos at kanyang mga kaibigan o kanyang mga pamilya. Okay. When the Marcoses left, merong naiwan na personal na pera ni President Marcos sa Security Bank. Ito yung tinatawag na 7,700 accounts. Ang number kasi noon 7,700, 77,001, 77,002, marami yan. Pero yun ang number na nagsisimula. Meron yang peso account, meron yang dollar account. All right. Ilang bilyon ang andyan? Malaki. I just don't have the figures right now, but they were there. And the government of Mrs. Aquino, together with some of her friends, took over the Security Bank, took over that amount of money. Yun ang unang-unang nilang ginawa. So may pera. Saan pumunta yung pera? According to the decree, the order of Mrs. Aquino, the money that they're getting from the Marcos properties and Marcos assets should go to the Agrarian Reform Program. Ano yung Agrarian Reform Program? This involves our farmers in the field, our fishermen. Basta yan ang buong sako ng ating agrarian sector. And whatever it is that they got from all of these monies and assets should go there. How many billions of pesos did they get just in the first year? Hindi na natin pag-uusapan pa yung haba ng panahon na marami pa silang nakukuha. Did it go to the Agrarian Reform Program? If it did, what kind of assistance did that money do as far as our agriculture is concerned? So that kung talagang nabigay yan sa agrarian reform, sana hindi naghihirap ang ating mga magsasaka sa kasalukuyan. Madidinig mo nga sa Kongreso ngayon, yung mga congressmen na nagdidefensa ng ating mga magsasaka. Yun nga ang sinasabi, hindi na nabago yung kanilang buhay simula pa ng 34, 35 years ago when the Aquino government took over. Saan napunta yung perang kinuha sa mga assets at sa mga bangko ng mga Marcoses, which is supposed to go by her own law, by her own executive order, which is supposed to go to the agrarian reform, diyan sa mga magsasaka na yan. In other words, nabigyan na ng partitioning sa mga lupa ng mga asendero, yung ating mga farmers, 7 hectares or how many hectares per farmer. And they're supposed to be given assistance by the government to be able to plant and to raise food products. Other than that, then you had the order of Mrs. Aquino at yung pera ng kanilang nakukuha galing sa mga Marcoses, dyan ilalagay. Maliban nga doon sa sinasabi ko that they were able to get, for instance, the money in the Security Bank, personal yan, ha? Hindi na dumaan yan sa halos sa court. Basta sinabi lang na kay Marcos yan, kinuha na lang yan, by order, binigay dyan supposedly to the agrarian reform. And several other assets that they were able to get, real estate properties, yan binenta nila. For instance, we had the building in San Francisco, and the head of the GSIS at the time was, what's his name, Congressman Belmonte, but he was the head of the GSIS at the time. Ang pag-aari yan ng Pilipinas, pag-aari ng Philippine government. But they alleged that it was Marcos who built it because yung pagbili ng building na yon did not come from the sources of government. So ang nangyari dyan, yung building na, and it's in Union Square, San Francisco, one of the busiest commercial centers, ang mahal talaga ng real estate, and that was sold. That was one of the first real estate properties in America that was sold by the Aquino government. Where did the money go? So that is again several billions of pesos kasi millions of dollars yan, yung amount na yan. And then when Mrs. Marcos was acquitted in the trial of New York, there were 4 prime real estate properties. Yan sa Crown Center, sa Herald Center, yung 40 Wall Street. Lahat ng yan, 4 na buildings yan. Nung na-acquit si Mrs. Marcos, that should have been returned to her, to the family of the Marcoses, because it was proven beyond reasonable doubt that the money that went into those buildings did not come from the Philippine government. Hindi pera ng taong bayan. After 350,000 documents and after 95 witnesses, wala silang nakuha na magsasalita. Ni isa na witness na nagsasabi yan ay kinuha sa budget. Yan, pinag-uusapan nga natin ng budget. Yan ang National Treasury. Kinuha yan ng mga Marcos para bilhin yung buildings. Wala. Walang document at walang tao na nag-testify tungkol dyan. So, nung si Mrs. Marcos sa trial na yan, remember, that was supposed to be a conspiracy. So, kasama na dyan si Ferdinand Marcos, yung kanilang mga anak, yung kanilang pamilya. So, because of the acquittal, meaning unanimous decision that she is not guilty, lahat sila of getting the money of the Filipino people dyan sa ating National Treasury, dyan sa ating budget. So ano nangyari doon sa mga buildings na yon? Hindi ba? The State Department, the Justice Department of America should have turned over those buildings to the family, to the Marcoses. Kasi walang preba na yung pagbili ng buildings na yun ay nakaw na pera, wala eh. So kanino yun? Personal property nila na hindi rin nila napatunayan. Those monies came from the Swiss accounts kasi yon merong tinatawag na paper trail. We saw all of that, and I think I've talked about it so many times. If you look of those accounts that were in the name of foundations, wala nga sa pangalan ng mga Marcoses eh. They're in the name of the foundations, allegedly belonging to President Marcos. Those were the foundation accounts that money was transferred from Switzerland to California, from California to New York, from New York to buy those buildings. So that was the paper trail. In addition to the paper trail, there were also the bank managers of all this, kung saan dumaan yung pera na yon, from Switzerland to the banks in LA, in California, to the banks in New York, until the sales that happened in New York City from the banks to the payment for those buildings. So lahat yan naka-paper trail, and then the people that were handling the transfer of this money until the payment for those buildings, they were there in court testifying how it was. As a matter of fact, your question would be, was there anything illegal in those bank transfers? Wala. Because that is how the money goes from one bank to the other to purchase real estate. Nung tinanong nga, is it a crime that those buildings are not in the name of the Marcoses? No, it is not a crime. Well, other than the Trump Tower and all the properties of Donald Trump today, most buildings in New York and perhaps in other cities in America are not in the name of the persons who are actually the big investors in those buildings. They are in the name of corporations, of foundations, of something else. The anonymity is protected, and there is a law regarding this. It is not illegal to have a building which you buy named after a foundation or somebody else, not in your name. That is why that procedure is undertaken, so that the anonymity of the person is defended by that kind of a transaction, and that is legal in America, and so it is too here in our country. You have corporations owning several businesses and so forth, not exactly with the name na ito Manuel Villar, etc., but it is in the name of either the daughter or a corporation that that person owns. So be that as it may, what happened to those buildings? It was sold. The Philippine government sold it, hindi naman kanila. You see how anomalous the situation was. These are thousands of dollars, millions rather of dollars, the worth of these buildings are millions of dollars. What happened when they sold it after the trial of Mrs. Marcos? Wala namang isang sentimo siya nakuha dyan. Not at all. In fact, by the time that she could afford to get an auditing firm to look into those buildings, wala na, nabenta na for prime properties. And then what happened to all the other assets that of the Marcoses that they got inside Malacanang? These are the silver collection from Russia during the time of the czars, etc. These are the silver, several items, and that also cost several millions of dollars and several billions of pesos. If you look at the exchange rate at the time that they sold it, it has not even been proven that those assets or those silver collection was actually bought from the money of the people. Wala. Basta sinabi na lang na, ay, kasi dyan sa Malacanang, kay Mrs. Marcos yan, or kay Ferdinand Marcos, so kinuha, and then they sold it. They sold it in auction. Christie's in New York was the one who was selling this. And then the paintings, for instance, another thing I've mentioned so many times. In fact, in one of my programs, I even showed some of those paintings. Renaissance and pre-Renaissance artists were the ones who painted this, and those paintings were already on exhibit at the museum, the Metropolitan Museum of our country in Manila. And yet, the government of Mrs. Aquino got them all and auctioned them and sold them. Sold them to Christie's, and Christie's auctioned them. This is again, the cost of this would be several millions again. Saan pumunta yung pera? Sabi nga, nung kanyang order, the law of Mrs. Aquino said pupunta sa agrarian reform. At marami pang iba, several other real estate properties at marami pang mga pinaghinahala. They just suspected that it belonged to Marcos and they just sequestered it, got it, sold it, or some of them even stole it. Sequestered, sold, and stole. And, and steal, whatever the three S's talaga. Ang sakit pakinggan, ngunit ganyan na nga ang nangyari. Did anybody audit the PCGG after getting all of this? Did you hear of any auditing? Ngayon, maliliit na bagay, dami-daming ino-audit. Ito, billions and billions of pesos na kinuha nila. Hindi ino-audit. And people are still talking, nagnakaw si Marcos. Kung lahat ng yan ay napunta na nga dyan sa kinuha ng gobyerno ni Mrs. Aquino, napupunta sana sa ating agrarian sector, anong nangyari sa ating agriculture? Bakit ngayon hirap tayo sa presyo ng ating mga gulay, sa presyo ng ating bigas, bumibili tayo sa ibang bansa, umaasa tayo na hindi tayo maubusan ng mga basic commodities na yan. What happened to our agricultural sector with all of that money taken from alleged assets of the Marcoses that should have gone to the agrarian sector? Kaya ako ito pinapag-usapan sapagkat ngayon, naghihirap ang ating Presidente Duterte at ang kanyang pamahalaan para maghanap nga ng source of funds. Gusto nga nila magbenta na ng government property para makaraise ng funds. Yung ating mga remittances na nanggagaling sa mga workers natin na nagtatrabaho sa abroad ay kumukonti na rin sapagkat marami sa kanila na nagsiuwian na, marami sa kanila na yung pinagtatrabahuhan nila ay nagsarang just temporarily closed because now it's a difficult time for them and also because of the health protocols that they also have to follow. So many of these remittances are not coming in the way they should have. As of last year, for instance, malaking damage na gawa ito sa dollar reserves na nanggagaling sa mga overseas workers. At sabi ko nga, marami na nagsisiuwian, kaya ngayon kinakailangan na matulungan na rin itong mga taong ito. So, where am I leading on to? First, that is it. The money that ought to have been taken from all of these assets of the Marcoses' alleged assets should have been brought according to their own law to the agrarian sector. Another aspect there, for instance, is yung pera na nanggaling sa mga Swiss banks. Because remember, the reason why Mrs. Marcos and the rest of those involved in that so-called conspiracy were acquitted unanimously and said that there was really no proof that money was taken from the Philippine Treasury. Anong nangyari diyan? Yung pera na yung mga pera sa Swiss banks, halimbawa, na sinabi nga na kay Marcos din yan, although it was not in his name or even of Mrs. Marcos' name, nilipat yan, sabi ng Swiss government. And remember, this was not even a decision on the cases regarding those bank accounts. This was simply a decision made by the Swiss court that the money that is there in those accounts as identified will be turned over na sa Philippine government and don't bother us anymore. Sabi nga ng Swiss government, sabi din ng Swiss banks. That was a decision. There was no proof in that decision na yung pera nakaw sa Pilipinas. In fact, one of the provisions there, kasi it's written in German, and they did not translate the entire provisions of this decision of the Swiss court, because there are provisions there which says that the determination of that money in those accounts should be undertaken by the Philippine government. Yun ang isang provision doon. Sapagkat ayaw na ng Swiss na ginugulo sila. Mayat-maya, tinatawagan sila, pinapadala ng sulat, ano ba yung mga pera na yan, ilang pa ba natitira dyan, ano ba yan. So, tinurn over na. It was turned over to the Philippine government at the time. Wala tayong bangko dito sa Pilipinas na yung tinatawag ng AAA or there is a category of banking institutions, and at the time, we did not have a bank or several banks that could handle that large amount of money coming from those Swiss accounts. Remember, even in the court, it was proven beyond reasonable doubt with that those monies actually are there and that there was no connection with the Philippine government. But whatever it is, para hindi na nga magulo daw sila sa Switzerland, tinurn over nila. And that was where the money went to the banks in Singapore. doon dineposit. And after a while, na-transfer na rin sa Pilipinas, and this was the time of Mrs. Arroyo, election time yan. How many billions again of pesos ang nalipat dito sa mga bangko dito sa PNB, I understand. And that should have been again turned over to the agrarian sector. Kasi yun ang batas nila. Kailangan sundan yung kanilang batas. Oo nga, sinundan nila, anong ginawa nila? Bumili ng mga supposedly fertilizers, insecticides, lahat ng yan, nagkaroon ng skandalo. Yung pera na yan na bumalik na sa Pilipinas para bumili o mapunta sa agrarian reform. Hindi yan binigay sa mga magsasaka. Binigay yan na pagbibili ng mga tulong, insecticide, pesticide, pero nung nagkaroon ng investigasyon kung magkano yung pumunta sa mga agrarian sector natin, this is the time of Mrs. Arroyo, naku, lumabas na si Napoles dyan. The fertilizer scam, sabi nga, sa milyon-milyon. And even the budget secretary at the time of Mrs. Aquino was involved in this. Name na nga ni Mrs. Napoles kasi siya yung private individual na pati yung mga empleyado niya, sila ang pumipirma na nakatanggap ng fertilizer kasi nga kailangan yung pera na nakuha nila sa Swiss banks pupunta sa agriculture sector. So sa agriculture sector, yan ang kanilang binili daw at i-distribute daw. Pero ang nangyari dyan, ang dami-daming pirma kung sino-sino, mga katulong niya sa bahay, lahat-lahat, driver niya. And this is by her own admission. I am not making up this story. Because there was a long investigation in Congress regarding this. That they were signing, that they received assistance, and they were farmers, kung saan-saan yan. Diyan napunta yung milyon-milyon na naman na pera for the agriculture sector. And that's why I'm now just about screaming. Nagkakandahirap tayo ngayon tungkol sa pera para sa ating agrikultura, para magkaroon tayo ng pagkain sa ating lamesa, lalong-lalo na doon sa mga walang trabaho at hindi makakita ng hanap buhay, magkaroon man lang sana ng pagkain kung inasikaso yung agrikultura natin sa bilyon-bilyon na kanilang nakuha nung nakaraan at sana pinondohan na yung ating mga magsasaka. Ang dami pa po na mababanggit ko, wala lang sa akin yung listahan ng PCGG na lahat kumuha niyan at lahat na nag-sequester niyan na kinakailangan nabigay sa agriculture. Mga skandalo, one scandal after the other. And one of the biggest actually, yun na nga, sa milyon-milyon na nakuha doon sa Swiss accounts. Can you imagine that? Fertilizer lang, nung sinabi nga, nung tinesting yung fertilizer ng tubig. And by the admission of this lady, nakakulong siya ngayon, ayaw niya magsalita at maging state witness at banggitin pa kung sino pa ang nakinabang dyan. Baka nga siya patayin ng mga kasamahan niya. Ngunit nakakulong siya kasi sinundo pa nga yan. Nung magsusurrender siya, sinundo pa siya ni Mar Rojas. Hinatid pa. Dinamuna sa Malacanang. Pagkatapos, at saka hinatid sa hindi pa sa Muntinlupa, sa kulungan muna habang iniimbestiga. Habang pinag-uusapan yung scandal na yan. Kasi nilalabas siya sa kulungan para mag-testify sa Congress. And we heard her testimonies. And she even admitted na nagturo sa kanya kung paano gagawin yan yung mismong budget secretary nung panahon na yon. My goodness. Hindi ba kaya kailangan umiiyak ako habang kinikwento ko ito. Yan ang nangyari sa pera ni Marcos na sana pumunta sa ating agricultural sector kung sakasakali man na kanilang napatunayan na yon ay nakaw sa taong bayan. Hindi napatunayan yan. Actually, ang nangyaring desisyon dyan, si Chief Justice Renato Corona ang nagdesisyon na yung pera na yan ay kailangan sa taong bayan, sa gobyerno pupunta sapagkat maliit daw ang sweldo ni Marcos at saka ni Imelda kumpara dun sa kanilang mga bank accounts. Kaya sa batas, sinasabi pagka hindi mo ma-explain, if you're not able to explain how you acquired so much money with your so little salary and you're a public official, then that money is taken over by the government. It has to be taken over by the government. But they did not allow Marcos to explain. Siya lang ang nakakaalam kung saan nanggaling yan, kung paano nagkaroon sa Swiss accounts. They did not allow him, and that is a violation of a basic human right to face his accusers in court for a criminal case, especially since he was accused of stealing the money of the Filipino people. He was never allowed to come back and defend himself. Siya lang ang nakakaalam. Even those people handling his accounts in Switzerland, yung mga pinatawag lahat yan, hindi nila alam kung saan ang galing. Basta pumapasok lang and it is there registered. That is why you call it unexplained wealth. Hindi yan nakaw. It is not stolen wealth. It is unexplained because the man who could explain it already died when the trial was going on. And he was never allowed to come back to our Philippine courts para harapin. Lahat yan, sila Chavez, sila Salonga, lahat ng mga nag-aakusal sa kanya, marami pang mga buhay sa kasalukuyan. They could have been there in court, face to face, at sabihin kay Marcos, ikwento mo sa amin, paano ka yumaman ng ganito. That is the reason why I have to go back to that period in time, where if we already were able to source funding for the agricultural sector because of their law, then our agricultural sector would not be in this bad shape. Ano yung ginamit na salita ngayon sa kasalukuyan? Actually, it's ongoing. They're discussing the budget on agriculture, kaya ako ito nalabas. And anong sinabi nga nung isang congressman doon? The agricultural sector is sick. May sakit. Naghihingalo, malapit nang mamatay. Sabi niya, pasalamat na lang na yung bagong Secretary of Agriculture ay doktor at marahil ay magagamot niya yung sakit ng ating agrikultura. Ngunit, kung hindi alam kung ano yung pinanggagalingan ng sakit na yan, kahit na anong ilagay mo dyan sa agrikultura, hindi rin yan gagaling. At nalulungkot nga siya, sabi niya, perhaps in another 10 years or even shorter, pero hanggang 10 years na lang, we will not have any farmer anymore. Sapagkat hanggang sa kasalukuyan, hirap ang ating magsasaka para magpatubo ng pagkain na mailalagay natin sa ating lamesa. You see how it goes? Why I'm connecting this? When the government now is in dire need of funding, kung yung funding noong 1986, 87 at lahat ng panahon na nakaraan, nabigay sa agriculture sector ng tama, properly given and done as far as the programs for agriculture concerned, marahil ay nag-e-export na rin tayo, hindi lang ng bigas, para lahat na ng agricultural products pwede na natin export. Ano in-export natin? Prutas, mangoes, bananas. Pero yung mga basic na products nanggagaling pa sa ibang bansa, tingnan nyo yung bawang ngayon, yung sibuyas, and several others, kahit okra, lahat ng yan. Well, whatever it is, that is just why I am mentioning this, because sayang, mababalikan pa ba natin yan? Wala na, pero mababalikan natin ang auditing para malaman, para habulin yung mga tao na hindi tama ang kanilang ginawa sa pera na yan na sana pumunta sa agrikultura. Ngayon, pinag-uusapan din kaya ako nababalikan ito. Pasensya na kayo, itong oras natin talagang dedicated dito sa mga pinanggagalingan sana ng ating sourcing. Yung food terminal na tinayo ni Mrs. Marcos, ang napakalawak at napakalaki dyan. Sinabi nga niya na ang gobyerno na ang kukuha ng lahat ng produkto sa bukid at diretso nang dadalhin dyan sa food terminal at dyan iriripak para maibahagi sa mga tindahan na kung ano man yung presyo doon sa bukid na tumubo na yung magsasaka ay hindi na dadaan sa maraming mga maraming mga traders at kung sino-sino pang dinadaanan yan at pinapatungan lahat yan hanggang makadating sa ating mga tindahan. Ito, diretso na. Kukunin doon sa bukid, babayaran ang mga magsasaka, yung bayad sa kanila, may tubo na sila, kumita na sila, itatransport yan dyan sa food terminal, may mga freezer yan, doon sa mga kinakailangan i-freeze, o yung temperatura dyan ay calibrated, para pagkatapos na madala yan doon, i-distribute yan doon sa tinatawag na kadiwa stores. Nagtayo ng maraming, parang grocery, pero ito, pagkain. yung kadiwa stores na yan, sila ang i-distribute sa kanila, sa mga kadiwa stores na yan, na yung mga food products na yan. Anong ibig sabihin nun? Wala na naman patong yan dun sa mga traders sa magdadala na naman yan, bulk, kasi that is in bulk, nadadalhin dun sa mga tindahan, sa mga kadiwa stores. In the kadiwa stores, yung kanilang kikitain dyan para lang sa elektrisidad at siguro sa mga employees nung kadiwa stores na hawak din ng pamahalaan. In other words, nasa sweldohan, hindi na tutubo as business. Hindi gagawin na business yung pagkain. Kung saan nanggaling yan, kung sino nagtanim yan, kung saan dadalahin yan, kung paano aayusin yan para malagay sa mga tindahan. Mga empleyado yan, may sweldo. Hindi sila nagpapatong sa presyo ng pagkain na yan. So whatever it is, chicken, pork, beef, etc., eggs, and all the vegetables, and of course rice. Nagkaroon nga tayo ng panahon na yon na nag-export pa tayo ng bigas, which is one of our prime commodities. But I'm talking about the food terminal. Hindi nila ginamit yan. Simula nung pumasok yung pamahalaan ni Mrs. Aquino, kasi si Mrs. Marcos daw ang gumawa. So ano nangyari? Nag-deteriorate na lang. Yung malaking facilities na yan. Hindi nila pinagpatuloy sapagkat proyekto ng panahon ni Ferdinand Marcos. Can you imagine that? Hanggang sa ngayon, kamakailan lang, binili yan ng isang oligarch. Binili ng mga conglomerate ng mga Ayala. At hindi natin alam kung ano itatayo nila dyan. Pero sayang, hindi po ba? Sapagkat yun na sana ang prosesong nangyari. Kaya binalikan ko yon sapagkat pwede pa rin tayo magpatuloy sana ng ganyang klaseng palakad para magkaroon tayo ng bilihin ng ating pagkain na makakaya natin sa ating sweldo at sa ating kinikita sa pang-araw-araw food, which is so essential. That's exactly what we're talking about. Pinag-uusapan sa budget ng agriculture, sourcing. Kulang nga yung kanilang pondo always, parang nababawasan parate. Saan napunta lahat ng pera na yan? Yung pagbenta ng FTI. Kasi sequester din yan eh. Hindi po ba? So yung pera na yan, kailangan sa agrikultura rin pupunta. Bakit naghihingalo ang agrikultura ngayon? Milyon-milyon yan kung talagang tama yung presyo nung binenta yung property na yan. Government yan. Government. Can you imagine that? Kaya yan ang sinasabi ko ng napakasakit pag-usapan sapagkat lahat tayo nangangapa kung saan kukuha ng ating daily sustenance. Nabanggit ko na nagkaroon tayo ng panahon na yon na nakapag-export tayo ng bigas. Paano ba nangyari ito? Yan din ang sana na ipagpatuloy sa kasalukuyan. Yung programa na tinatawag Masagana 99, parang 99%, 99 yung yield. Biruin yan, 3 beses sa isang taon na nag-aani. Paano nangyari na nagkaganon? Nagtayo ng International Rice Research Institute, yan, panahon ni President Marcos. Pinag-aralan lahat ng binhi at nakakita sila ng parang, hindi naman parang, ng katunayan na itong klaseng bigas na ito, tinawag nga nilang miracle rice, sapagkat mabilis tumubo yung palay at mabilis mag-ani, kahit 3 beses sa isang taon pwedeng mag-ani. So yan lahat, pinag-aralang mabuti at binigyan talaga ng sapat na tulong ang magsasaka. Kanina nga sa Kongreso, hanggang ngayon siguro pinag-uusapan pa nila, sinasabi na matagal bago tumubo yung binhi, yung palay. You have to wait for several months before you can harvest. You also have to check on the irrigation, lahat ng yan. And then, during that period of time, anong kakainin naman ng magsasaka? So that is why during the time of President Marcos, tiningnan lahat yan. The support system for the farmers themselves while they're waiting to harvest their products. The assistance for all the equipment that they will be needing at that time. Siguro noon karabaw, pero yung pag anong tawag dito, whatever it is that will, yung paghukay ng lupa, and hindi pa tayo wala pa mga malalaking traktora noon at that time, siguro meron na nakatulong din. But whatever it is, the facilities, the equipment, and the input to make the products, para yung mga insecticides, yung mga pesticides, lahat ng mga yan, nabigay lahat yan ng tulong sa tinataniman para nga maayos ang tanim, madami at mabilis makaharvest. Maliban dyan, binigyan din ng tulong ang mga magsasaka para dun sa panahon na iniintay nila na yung kanilang tinanim ay maging palay at matuyo yung palay at kanilang anong tawag dito, mahasa nila yan, and all of this until maano nila sa mga lalagyan ng yung mga sako para mabenta. May mga presyo na yan at yun ang panahon na yon ni Marcos, nakaano na yan, nakasulat na kung magkano ang kita ng magsasaka para hindi naman siya lugi at para magkaroon siya ng sapat na kita na mababayaran niya yung parang paluwag na pera na binigay sa kanya sa 3 buwan na iniintay niya na mabuo yung tinanim niya na binhi, maging palay at maging bigas. Kaya lahat yan binuhos, hindi lang sa mga kinakailangan para lumaki yung product, yung production, but everything else was taken care of to give to the farmer all the things that he needed, irrigation and all of this that I've mentioned, and to the person of the farmer himself, so that he has something to tide him over until he's able to sell his product. In the time being, he could also plant vegetables. Meron din siyang plots doon para magtanim ng gulay at other agriculture products, at yun din pwedeng ibenta. Pati sa poultry, pati sa piggery, lahat na yan, pati sa mga baka, lahat na yan binuhusan ng tulong ng pamahalaan. And that is why, at that time, we had enough food. We had enough agriculture products. Wala tayo ng tinatawag na category of those that are going hungry. May mga mahihirap. Poverty is all over. It is not all over the world. It is not uniquely Philippine. Kahit na pumunta ka sa mga malalaking syudad sa iba't ibang bansa. You go even to America, for instance, which is supposed to be one of the most progressive and powerful country in the world. They also have the poor. You have all of these homeless people sleeping under the bridge and so forth. So everywhere you have poverty for many reasons. But at the time of Marcos, walang statistical factor na sinasabing ang tao ay nagugutom o kaya yung forced to be hungry because of circumstances. Wala talagang makuhang pera, walang mabiling pagkain at walang pagkain na mabibili rin, kulang. Whatever it is, that was the situation that we are in today. And why is this happening now? Because programs that you already instituted and already functioning at that time were never continued. And that is why we have this reason for asking all of these questions that they have there in Congress, asking what happened to the agriculture. Ano bang magagawa dyan? Paano ba natin maaayos yan? I have some notes here because that's very important also to understand. Sa dinami-dami kasi ng mga ginawa ng pamahalaan ni Mrs. Aquino para halungkatin ang mga assets ni Marcos at kunin lahat yan, ibenta o sequester, etc. And it's supposed to go by their own law to our agriculture sector. Hindi doon nakatulong at all, and that is exactly what we see today. It's very sad because even at this stage, a lot of people are still wondering, paano ba tayo makakaahon? Saan tayo kukuha ng pondo? Nakalipas na ang aking pinag-uusapan. Ngunit binabalik ko sapagkat yung mga programang naging maayos ng panahon na yon and were successful in the implementation, pwede pa natin magaya. Ngayon nga, ang tawag nga ni Secretary Dar doon sa kanyang mga rolling stores, mga kadiwa stores. Yun din ang pangalan na ginamit ng panahon ni President Marcos. Kadiwa, ano bang ibig sabihin ng diwa? Hindi ba yun yung from the spirit, from hindi lang basta nakakatulong sa ating physical well-being, but it is also something that will lift our spirits to a certain degree na yung ating depression yung ating anxieties and all of these questions that we're asking would at least be, it would be quelled in such a way that there is assistance that we can obtain from many sources. And we keep going back to this, or I keep going back to this, because these are the reasons why programs which are already good. I'm not saying that everything was just done during the time of Marcos. There's several other programs and systems which have been from one administration to the other. Sana may continuity. Ipagpatuloy. Kung merong konting kailangan baguhin or ayusin at pagbutihan. So many laws, for instance, should be able to have taken care of many of those that were already written centuries ago. Yan nga, pinag-uusapan natin yung agrarian reform. Tama yung tama yung paniniwala noong panahon na yon. Sapagkat noon, bago nagkaroon ng agrarian reform, ay yung mga mayayaman na asendero, sila lang ang nagpapalakad ng mga thousands and thousands of hectares. Kaya, kinailangan na kuha natin sa mga ibang bansa, bigyan ang mga bawat magsasaka ng kanyang sariling lupa. Nag-isip na rin sila na hindi kaya ng isang magsasaka na mag-produce para sa atin doon sa kanyang 7 hectares. Baka yun ay sapat pa lang sa kanyang pamilya, sa pag-aaral ng kanyang mga anak. So anong ginawa? Nagkaroon ng cooperatives. Nagkaroon naman ng abuse din sa mga cooperatives na. What I'm trying to say is, these congressmen that are now debating and discussing and arguing and defending the budget should look into the source, yung sabi nga natin, the root of everything, which is the agricultural sector. Is the agrarian reform program contributory to the production of our food in such a way that people do not have to go hungry because there is food that is affordable and available? They should look into that now, especially. Yung tinatawag ng CARP, hindi lang agrarian reform, meron pang CARP, which is a comprehensive agrarian reform program. Meron na ngang agrarian reform, meron pang comprehensive. What are they comprehending? What do they want to get together? That, I think, should be studied. That's a priority for Congress to look into. Taon-taon, ng budget dito, magbibigay sa CARP. Budget, pero ang dami nang pumasok dyan, supposedly, from all the billions and billions that they were able to obtain from the time of Mrs. Aquino, from all of the assets of the Marcoses. Aba, edi, sana naayos na yan. So, kung hindi naayos ang agricultural sector na binigyan na sana ng pondo noon, something is wrong. So, they should look into that. Kaya, kagaya rin ng ginagawa sa ibang mga departments na kailangan yung batas na yon ayusin. Ito na lang distribution ng yan sa bayanihan na sinasabi ko, yung pera na binibigay sa mga nangangailangan. Sino nag-aayos niyan? Ang mga barangay. Yan kailangan pag-aralan din. Ano ba yung mga barangay? Local officials. Tama ba, sapat ba yung mga ginagawa ng mga barangay sa kasalukuyan? O kailangan tingnan ang local government code para malaman natin merong kailangan adjustment dyan. So that is how it should go. Hindi lang yung pagdating ng panahon ng budget deliberations, titingnan lang yung pondo. At ngayon, ang malungkot nga, ang nadidiskubre, of course, hindi lang nadidiskubre, andyan yan. Yung tinatawag na pork barrel, magkano ang amin dyan? Kasi mag-e-election na eh. Mag-e-election na sa 2022. So lahat ng pera na yan, pera ng taong bayan, na paghahati-hatian para sa mga departamento, kailangan din meron din silang konti. You see how it is? You see how sad the situation is. Anyway. So that is how it goes. Maybe next time I will also go into other programs which were already successful in the past. And always, why do I keep on going back during those years? Because now, they keep on talking in snippets, criticizing Marcos and all his wealth, etc., when actually they have not done anything at all that has been able to help the people themselves. So, well, the pandemic is still here. We have the quarantines. We have all the health protocols. Follow them because you've seen the experience in Europe. So stay home if you're not, if you don't have to go out for any other reason. Stay home as much as possible. Observe distancing. wear the mask, wear the shield. I still don't understand why the shield is also important. Anyway, so that is it. They tell this to us. It's not coming from this association of doctors. It's coming from that task force that was created by government. But let's follow it nonetheless. So stay safe, follow the health protocols, wear a mask, wash your hands, and above everything else, have your prayer every minute of the day, so that every time we come up with our words, it should really be in the form of a prayer in such a way that we can understand the meaning of all of this and offer our lives to the greater path that God has for us. Thank you very much for having joined me. This is your Rita Gadi hour. It's actually your hour.